Test, test, test. Come on. Good afternoon. Welcome to the special meeting of the Tourist Development Council. It is approximately 12, what time is it? 3:04, and we'll call this meeting to order. We do have a quorum. We're missing a few members, our 2 city council members and our Mr. Reeves, who called in sick, unfortunately, so we wish him well. The meeting is called to order. Do we have any public speakers who would like to talk to the subjects on the agenda? No? All right, seeing none. We will, well, before we move into the topics, I understand, Commissioner Bender, that you wanted to add the Beach Access 4 to the agenda. I'd personally prefer to hold off until the August meeting, but if there's, a desire from other members to discuss it today, we can obviously add it.
Sure. If I may, just for a quick second,
please.
Talk more about why to add it. For those that didn't watch the discussion last week, it looks like the cost for Beach Access number 4 is about $91,000 more than what we had initially approved. And I would say that there's some thinking that would not need to come back before this board. But of course, given the discussion we've had over the last 2 years, I wanted to make sure that we were transparent and that the board was aware that the county is requesting the additional $91,000 for that. I would say not addressing it today does not delay the project, but again, full transparency, I just wanted this board to weigh on it and at least be aware that the board is asking for another $91,000 for Beach Access 4. So if it's the will of the chairman to wait till August, we can do that, but just laying it out on why.
All right, thank you very much. Is there a desire from the rest of the board to discuss it today? Tish?
Unless if it makes if we know for a fact you're saying it's coming out of TDT, then I think we probably I would like to discuss it.
So in the meantime, we are going to use the general fund dollars until it came back in front of this board.
Okay.
And, you know, so I wouldn't say it was immediate need to have it done today. I had mentioned it last week that I wanted it, you know, we were hoping to get it on today, but, you know, I think it might be if we want to wait till August, let the board go back and watch, I think our board's fairly robust discussion, not just on Beach Access 4, but on a few other things. It was the beach access number 4 from last week. Just go back, you can go right to that item and watch the entire discussion, because we went into we went into a bigger picture of what to do with sports tourism and things like that, and how we'd like to maybe use some of this money for those projects. And so I would be happy to wait until August to give the board time to go back and view that discussion.
And that was last week?
Yes, ma'am. Tina, maybe we can just get the link, if David's in the back there, maybe we can just pull that discussion and send it out. Or at least a direct link to the video.
Yeah, that would be great. And I would like to look at that.
Okay, perfect.
All right. So we'll table the discussion till August, but bring it back up on the agenda for the August meeting. Okay. Thank you very much. All right, so next order of business is approval of a budget of the TDT to recommend to the Board of County Commissioners for their 2022 annual budget. Attached to our agenda is a copy of what we had all discussed last week at the meeting. And I believe that reflects clearly what we all discussed, unless somebody sees a mistake that I made before I sent it to Tina to distribute. Any comments, questions, discussion?
This budget, we just are giving our approval on it for Visit Pensacola? This is more of Visit Pensacola's,
Well, this would
Outline.
be, what this is right here is if we agree to everything that's on here in the circled proposed 2022, then we're making that recommendation to the county commissioners.
I got it.
Of course, they don't have to take our recommendation, it's just a recommendation.
Right.
We can't bind their actions. So if we feel that, if this body feels that this budget for 2022 is the highest and best use for developing tourism for next year, then that would be the recommendation. If we don't believe that's it, then we need to have that discussion, and the hope is to have that discussion and to a conclusion today to make a recommendation.
I have a question.
Yes,
Did
ma'am.
we agree as a board for the additional amount? I know that the Naval Museum gets typically $100,000 from us for the STEM, so we agreed. I'm asking for that additional $100,000
See
for them.
anybody even from,
I don't think,
David, you want, so I have a follow-up phone call with Admiral Kozad tomorrow. But I would say that we met with Visit Pensacola after the meeting, and I think they're going to shift that towards marketing dollars and work in conjunction with Visit Pensacola to make sure that we have a consistent message.
Okay.
So that additional 100,000 would be for marketing of the museum
Okay.
outside of our area. And
So that's money we would give to, that would come out of Visit's budget. Here on this Naval Museum, the 4 cent, it's 200,000. That's just where I'm questioning.
So I thought we did leave it at the 200, but it would be, again, monies that the board would, what we'd say the board would typically control, is the 100,000 that we've given them for a long time, and then this additional 100,000 to be used towards marketing, I believe is going to be their change in the ask. And actually, they did send up, did we distribute that, the additional, the new backup they sent?
I did not receive anything.
Okay.
So we had discussed their request for the 200,000 was not for marketing the museum, but for their new program that they had described to us that was not actually marketing for tourism. It was marketing to the local school or building the program for local schools and stuff.
And I think they took that discussion and realized that there would be a better use of dollars to,
So why is this 200,000 in here? That's-
So when I put this together and sent it to Tina to send out to everybody, those were the requests that those
Oh,
four
okay.
agencies made.
Oh, okay.
So I think our discussion at the last meeting was to go ahead and put that on here. I'm not sure if, I mean, obviously, we haven't voted because we couldn't take
Okay.
any action, so.
I see, okay.
I'm of the opinion that they were receiving $100,000 to do marketing, and they're still limited in their access to the general public. I don't see doubling it for military members and guests only.
I believe that they expect to be able to release a plan that would get people on base that do not carry a military ID
Oh,
in the near future. Again, I haven't been able to sit down and have that discussion, but it sounds like that would be close to being announced.
So would we be able to move that additional $100,000 into the 1 through 5 cent BCC projects? And if they do make that announcement and allowed access, that the BOCC would then allocate those funds back to them as like a supplement to their appropriation?
So you're saying increase the BCC projects from 844 to 944?
Yes, move the 100 out of that guaranteed into basically contingency, that it's at the county. And if they do that, then the county makes that decision once they've made that operational change. That would allow access to visitors.
or could you give it to Visit Pensacola and let them keep it earmarked for marketing if and when other people could come?
I could be open to all this. What about if we split out the 200? If we just did two line items for them for 100 each?
And held off on the,
So, I mean, we
The
did
appropriation?
two lines, and one specific for marketing, and then the other, because I think the other one's been doing the National Flight Academy, I think it's just been doing other programming. And so that way it sort of kind of shows that it's two separate pots for them.
I don't, Commissioner, sorry about that. I think we were doing 100 for operations to begin with, and we had never done any for marketing for them. Is that correct?
Correct.
We had never done marketing previously for them.
Correct.
That's one of the two. Okay, just make sure.
But I would think, I have no problems with that, 2 lines spread out, but I would think that all marketing would be going through Visit Pensacola if it's TDC dollars, and that they would be working with Visit on that to give them that money. I just think they
Yeah.
can control it.
Especially if it's marketing, and if they're going to work with Visit Pensacola on the marketing plan, I think it's better to probably appropriate it to Visit Pensacola, and then, if and when the museum's ready for the public and tourists, then they can, speak with Visit and say, hey, 6 months from now, we're going to open, so now's the time to
And-
put this money out for
and the-
marketing.
And I would liken it a little bit to like what we did with the fireworks a few years ago, where it went to, if that's what we want to do, is that it went to Visit, knowing that 75 was going to the fireworks. I think it's a little bit bigger ask than what Visit would typically award for an outside agency that they have come before them. But I do believe it, the idea is that it falls more in line with where they're going with their outside agencies in terms of Visit, and that it doesn't cover a lot of the operational side of it, that it focuses on the marketing side, and that we try to keep a consistent message and theme that we get the most for our marketing dollars.
The only counter argument to that, I think, would be that National Aviation Museum probably markets to different markets than maybe Visit does, just based on the national or international. So and that's neither here
Yeah,
nor
that's
there.
a
But
good
I just
point.
wanted to make sure that we're aware of that as well. So, okay.
Well, I would think that Visit Pensacola would probably market the asset to its targeted market, which would align with, I would think. Would align. I mean, I don't think they would market an organization
Well,
outside of where they want to be marketed.
like, for example, I don't know that Visit goes in maybe the Gosport or something like that, you know what I mean? And the Gosport goes all over the world. And so if you're in, if you've got to come to Pensacola, you say, hey, man, maybe I get here or something, but that's just neither.
Well, that just opens up more possibilities for people thinking about Pensacola then.
Right.
Sure,
right,
okay,
So,
yeah, okay,
Right.
yeah.
So,
I mean, I would take board direction. And I think part of it is that we want to recognize that they had a $200,000 ask with the Board of County Commissioners, and that we're supportive of allocating that money for that. If yeah, I mean, however we want to list that.
I mean,
so what's the wish of the,
is the ask two line items for 100 each? One goes to Visit and then one goes to them for operations, is that where we're at?
I was gonna s-
One is for their marketing and one is for whether it's through Visit or a separate line item. But I just think all marketing efforts should go, that we give should go through Visit.
Yeah, I'm easy with that.
Sorry, Amber, were you able to pull up that email that the Admiral sent? It's not coming up properly on my phone.
Which email?
Let me see, he may not have.
probably not.
Which
You
one
can
was it
send
that
it.
you?
Let me, so the short of it is that the additional request of $100,000 for marketing funds to support the museum as a destination is the email I received. I just forwarded you the updated ask, I think, which outlines that. I just can't pull it up on my phone.
Well, and I certainly support them having another $100,000 to market the museum as a destination. My concern is their marketing is limited, and although there's plenty of people with military IDs that can get in that could come here, there's just such a broader audience for $100,000 that they can't really market to right now.
And I would, like I said, I'm talking with Admiral tomorrow, and I would also expect them to be at our meeting next week, which we could address those if they're ready, or if they just say we are preparing to release what the plan is, but that it would allow civilians access to the museum. And I agree. I mean, there was someone that emailed me earlier this week saying that they drove in from Dallas to see the museum and then realized they couldn't get on, and why were we still collecting TDT? And, it was like 1% of our collections last year went to the museum, but anyway. And so I explained all that. And the programming, as we said, upkeep of the airplanes and things like that, that didn't stop just because nobody could go on there. And we want to make sure that we still have a quality product to present when they are allowed access. And so I said it was unfortunate, but I also suggested that he write his congressman and senator and have them support the Enclave project when it comes up for a vote in Congress.
Yeah.
So, again, all things that we're working on to get access to the base and to the museum and the lighthouse and everything else.
Is that the reservation system that he was talking about?
I believe so.
Yeah.
So would everybody like to just break it out under that BOCC that fourth cent, having two line items, one for marketing specifically and the other, the general,
That's fine.
and keep it there instead of allocating? Because then if we're asking, although I agree Visit Pensacola should do the bulk of the marketing stuff, then we're asking them to specifically take this. and then we're directing their operations that we really probably shouldn't be meddling in.
But I think it's important to show that we want, where we're actually allocating $100,000 for marketing, and then the other 100,000 as it's been appropriated previously. So I think if we do two line items, marketing and then whatever we want to name what's been there before. And again, talking with Nicole and Darren, I think both of them were looking forward to the opportunity to work with the Naval Aviation Museum and focusing our marketing efforts. So
Okay. So for now, our recommendation will be to split that into $200,000 lines under that same section.
perfect.
All right.
And David, are you saying that the Naval Museum would, just a line item, one for operations, one's for marketing? Is that what we're doing?
Yeah, so
Okay.
one is consistent with what they've had,
Right.
and then the second would be for the marketing of,
My concern would be that I'm not sure how the Naval Museum does their marketing now versus Visit Pensacola that focuses on nothing but marketing, especially the area, so they would be able to piggyback or help the Naval Museum know, like where feeder markets are, that sort of thing, that maybe the Navy Museum doesn't look into, have reports for. So they may not do as smart of marketing as they could with Visit Pensacola as a partner in the 100,000. Just,
Well, I think they're still going to be partners.
yeah.
They're
Okay.
still going to be partners.
okay.
And truth is, we don't know, they may be a lot better than Visit Pensacola
Right.
with their military access and
Right.
database and all that. I mean, your point is fair, it
Right.
just can be looked at it from a different perspective too. I agree.
By the way, do you want to introduce our board member?
Yeah, we do have a new member
Temporary.
who we've adopted to the TDC. Would you like to say anything to the crowd?
Yeah, we got a new board member, Neam Patel.
Wait. You seem like. I did. It's awesome. Any other questions and comments?
We agree on the Chappie James.
Well, we've added that as a line, but we, as a board, have not, I mean,
I didn't know it.
yeah.
Did everybody receive the email from the clerk's office? Stating that, I believe it was the clerk, thought that use of funds, if deemed a tourist attraction or something that would attract tourists to this area, would deem that appropriate.
I didn't get the email.
I didn't get that,
recall,
and as we've discussed at other meetings,
You sent that, did you?
sometimes there's a difference of opinion on what is authorized and what is not authorized. Just because it's deemed, the item may be deemed a tourism development item, whether or not it's authorized to build it versus market it is a different conversation. Mike? Yes.
Hey, good, a little loud, sorry. Good afternoon, Chairman Bear. Yes, I conducted some research for you guys, and I found an Attorney General opinion that specifically discusses the construction of war memorials and statues. And so what I sent was an email kind of talking about that opinion, and I attached the opinion for your own reference. That way, when you guys would have the best available information when discussing about the memorial. But the the summary of the email is really talking about that the Attorney General's office cannot make the designation for the Board of County Commissioners if a war memorial is a excuse me, is a project, is an eligible project, and it would have to be up to the Board of County Commissioners, and that it breaks down even further into the statute 125-0104, and it talks about the marketing aspect of it. And what it starts diving into is if the board would designate that the War Memorial would be considered a service venue event that, and the Board of County Commissioners believe that it could be an item that could be designated for marketing, then it appears that they can make that designation and it can be used under marketing funds to construct this memorial. But I provided the Attorney General opinion, and in my email I kind of broke out, gave you guys a nice summary, and I just trying to help you guys have the best information available.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
All
Anybody
right.
have any questions for Michael?
So Dave, did you get that email?
Yeah, yes, I
So I didn't,
apologize.
I don't, does the entire board have my Escambia emails now? Or?
No, not everybody's using it.
But you-
I'm
just-
using mine.
Just you, okay.
I sent it to everyone. When I went into the emails, it looked like everyone had an Escambia clerk email,
Okay.
and that's what I sent it to.
Yeah, everyone has one, but
Okay.
but not everyone has set them up, yeah.
Oh,
They
okay.
prefer- some of us, I prefer it, but others haven't decided that.
Can you send that to our person? If you send it to me, I can get it to you.
Perfect.
Okay, then I'll make sure I send it to Tina, and then we can properly distribute the email.
That's perfect, thanks.
All right, actually, Tina, I've just forwarded it now. So, Mike, you're off the hook.
Yeah, thank you.
I do have a question on the second line for the day center operations,
Yeah.
that $1,300,000.
Yeah. Well, so it wasn't, I apologize, it wasn't supposed to be for operations, but that was, at the last meeting, Commissioner Bender had asked that we move forward like a fund from the Fund 108, the reserves, the unrestricted reserves, move it forward into next year for the Bay Center. So the 1.5 is a subsidy essentially for the Bay Center, and then that 1.3 would go towards, I think you'd mentioned capital improvements or projects.
Either renovations or even the future construction of facilities.
So I had some questions about that as well. Is it intended to be earmarked in reserves for that, to build a fund for certain project once like a plan has been placed, or go ahead and start sort of spending it to make some improvements? I mean, what was your,
I think it could be both. I know that Michael Capps is working on some proposal, some of the upgrades that are needed for the Bay Center. So I think that could be a use of the funds. And then also, as we either look to replace it, or the repairs that he talks about, or even in the discussion that we had the other day with the board that I've referenced, that there could be a sports venue that could be used with that money as we move forward. So that was the 1.3 that had been doing the debt servicing. And then once it was paid off in 2019, we were going to roll that over and continue to set it aside for capital improvement, a capital project, which we never got last year due to the shortage of amount of funds being collected. So I wanted to make sure that was still in there, just because it was a will of our board, and knowing that we have some improvements to the Bay Center, as well as probably new facilities wanting to come online in the next couple of years.
yeah, what I'd like, my opinion is, and I mentioned it at our last meeting, that we have, we continue to subsidize the Bay Center at $1.5 million. And the justification behind that is obviously the county owns the facility. We have a third-party management company, ASM Global, managing it. But there's some demands that the county puts on it. There's some contracts with the hockey team and some other, with the graduations and stuff, that kind of limit what ASM Global can do. And what I'd like to see is us come up with a plan that takes the $1.5 million plus the 1.3 million and kind of uses those revenues to make improvements to the facility that the ASM Global, the concessionaire, the third-party management company can say, hey, these are the improvements we need that will no longer need the subsidy. And maybe that's a 5-year return on that investment, at least 5 years, because that's what statute says we have to do. Or that's the life cycle of it. But they could possibly get a 5-year return on that and no longer need a subsidy. Then we free up that 1.5 million again, but plus the 1.3 to look at what type of project, whether it's a sports, center somewhere else or convention or conventions or multi-use facility.
And 200 of that is capital, so it's really, I think 1.3 goes towards operations.
Okay.
200 is maintenance and things. Yes.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
So of the 1.3 as well, part of that pays for the management contract. It also pays for the insurance on the building. So some of those expenses do not go, or some of that cash does not go directly to ASM. I just want us to keep that in mind as we're talking through it. I know Michael Capps has some great ideas and plans, and not to set him up for any pressure or failure, but we've had talks behind the scenes. You're on a perfect path.
Right.
So-
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. Let me ask you, is their contract like a triple net agreement where they're required to keep the insurance and we pay them, so they pay for the insurance that they're obligated to pay?
So we own the building.
Right.
So we have the insurable interest, which is why we insure the building.
So who insures the
Meaning
building?
Escambia County.
So does Escambia County actually purchase
Yes,
the
sir.
insurance? And so the 1.5 pays the insurance that Escambia County's paying for, and then the remainder goes to ASM, or does 1.5 million go to ASM? Plus we
1.5
pay.
million does not go to ASM.
Okay.
ASM
'Cause
receives
that's not
somewhere
what
around
it shows.
800,000 of that money.
So that's not what the clerk's office audit expenditure,
So what you're
Documents
seeing
are
on
showing.
your fund level reports is that 1.5 million does go to the Bay Center Fund.
to
The
yeah,
Bay
whatever
Center
that is,
Fund
109 or
within
whatever.
the county's books. Then from the county's Bay Center Fund, checks are written to ASM for about $800,000.
Okay.
Okay, so what you're seeing on the TDT report of what leaves the TDT fund is the amount that is going to the Bay Center Fund.
So just to make sure, we're paying for insurance out of this fund?
So we're paying for the Bay Center to be able to operate,
Okay.
correct? So,
Okay. Well, that's the first I've heard of that.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
not.
so I don't want us to think
Yeah,
that
no.
the Bay
Yeah.
Center, if ASM
Yes.
starts turning this big, huge profit, that expense goes away. The Bay Center still has to be there,
Yeah.
so,
So
we-
approximately $800,000 is going directly to ASM
correct.
for their operational, plus if they meet incentives that are in the contract.
Correct,
Yeah,
and the
of course.
200,000 in capital stays into an account that they request to be funded, or to fund any capital or repair expenses. For example, for next week, there's an item on the agenda to repair the ice floor, as well as to purchase some new brine pumps. I'm struggling because I don't understand what I'm saying. But it has to do with us having an ice floor so that we can play hockey and ice skate.
And does
So-
that come out of this fund?
That comes out of the 200,000 that goes from TDT
Yeah.
to the Bay Center Fund, and it sits in the Bay Center Fund until the Bay Center requests use for those dollars for specific eligible purposes. We don't just write them a $200,000 check and say, use it for whatever you want.
And this is not, right, because I can already see the tension coming here between this board and poor Amber. I'm so sorry. Just one second. So just to make sure that I understand, we are paying for insurance and pumps at the Bay Center out of this fund, correct? What's that just said? Okay. Okay.
So do they pull the 200,000 every year, or has there been an accumulated balance?
There was an accumulated balance, but part of that was used for a lot of the upgrades you've seen. We have a new video board, we have new concession storefronts, we have a
Oh,
new POS system.
Good.
All of those things
Yes.
help to attract more patrons into the building, so.
Right, okay.
I got a question. Weren't we told that some of that ASM put their money in to?
They did.
Okay,
Yeah, they did.
On top of that. So
on
the-
top of
yeah.
the accumulated funds.
So the
Yeah.
county's commitment to many of those improvements was through the TDT that's been going into the Bay Center Fund that then the county spent on the Bay Center. So
Correct.
it was not new money that the county committed to those.
I think so.
Well, we also
new.
put some of the ARP money
Correct,
towards it. What was that?
350.
350. We floated it using this money,
Right.
but it was
Which-
repaid.
It's
As
been
of-
repaid out of this fund.
Yep.
This fund
As-
has not paid for it.
As of last week, it was not paid back.
I've
Through the
received
7th or
confirmation
the
it's
8th?
been taken care of.
So those reports that you sent me last week, Michael, they had, the 350,000 had not gone back, or at least it wasn't reflected in that report. If it had been refunded, it still was showing the 1.85 million out of TDT to the Bay Center or the current year. It showed, I think, the $100,000 fix, that was because it was 450, the 100 plus the 350, that was credited, but I never saw a $350,000.
Yeah, you're right with the budget was fixed, and I was told that the transfer was being completed. I can go back and run the port and validate if it's been transferred or not.
That would be
But
good.
either way, if it hasn't, then we'll get it transferred.
Great, thank you.
One other comment too, if I might. Any of the adjustments we're talking right now about to the budget, they will not be incorporated before Tuesday, but we certainly can incorporate them between proposed budget and adopted. I want the board to understand, the TDC board to understand, we just don't have time to incorporate it in. So,
Let me ask a question. What is the return on investment for this for us? As just, maybe as a community, and sometimes that's hard to measure, right? It's kind of a community asset where we do these things. But if you think about it sort of in a business model, maybe, we've got a house and we're a landlord and we're paying for upgrades and we're paying for those things. And we have a tenant in there. Are we getting anything back from that tenant other than community events? Maybe a better question is, how much are we getting back from them, or if any? Do we have that? Do we get anything at all? Is there any money that we get?
have we had studies? I think there might be studies that have been
I'm
done.
sure there's some stuff.
Economic
Yeah, I mean-
impact studies.
I mean, you get the, yeah, what's the cost of taking your daughter to Disney on Ice and your son to Monster Trucks? And
Sold, I'm good.
Okay, I mean,
That answers right.
And all of the
Community
concerts.
grant,
It does,
but
right.
the tourist development tax
Right.
is a totally different, those are two separate subjects. Is it good for the community? Sure, but is it
Attracting tourists.
developing tourists? If
Right.
if we're hosting concerts and events and stuff that are driving tourists
That's
there,
right.
like.
Puts
obvious-
heads in the beds, yes.
Yeah, then, yeah, it's great. I mean, obviously, Pensacon is a huge user of that. I mean, they complain it's not big enough for them, and they
So,
pack it out.
Sunbelt. I mean,
Sunbelt
how many
is it.
teams, how many
In the
fans
future,
from the,
Sunbelt.
right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sold. Okay, move
year was a
on.
little
We're good.
Last year was a tough year.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, yeah, I wouldn't count
see,
last year.
you gotta go past
It's an
that.
anomaly.
though.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'd like to see that 1.3 million that we have here as sort of, rather than an appropriation to the Bay Center, and even going into that fund, the Bay Center fund being reserved in Fund 108 for
Yes.
capital
I
projects.
would say the 1.3 that's listed in the 1 through 3 cent BCC Bay Center operations, which we're going to strike base operations, that would not go straight into their fund. That would remain in our fund in a savings type area, but reserved for, it'd be one of those things where if we had a project, personally, I think that we could go ahead and do it, given the fact that the TDC's already approved monies to go towards that, towards improving the Bay Center or something like that, that we could go ahead and say, hey, we have this money sitting over here. Let's go ahead and move forward with the project, and we're going to be using these funds.
Yeah, that was my comment, is I'm not prepared today to say this 1.3 million should be going to the Bay Center for improvements, because we don't know what the plan is for those improvements. We have no idea what that means. They've already improved the concessions, they've improved the signs.
And I would expect Michael to come here and present us the same thing that he presents to the board.
But Yeah, but I'd like to see a bigger plan, is what I mean. Like, what is the overall community plan with the Bay Center? If there's a sports complex or multi-use facility that the county, that the folks want, then that's what the 1.3 needs to continue to accumulate to have, until we have a
Right.
real vetted plan that,
I thought, my understanding was that's what we did a few meetings, I think it was last year, that we sort of earmarked, said, hey, we're gonna put this, we're gonna have a set aside for when there was a plan. I thought that's what we did.
We
but-
did, but we never collected the money. That was part of the, that was what the BCC gave back to try to make our
That's right.
budget work.
Thanks.
So, you know, I know again, we talked about all this during that discussion last week. So I would recommend that we go back and look. And I think that our board is looking for users and stakeholders to come together to present to us what they feel would be best for our community in recruiting sports tourism, in recruiting for events, and also getting an ROI.
You know, I've said it a million times on this board that there has to be a better sports complex here for that kind of stuff, and I agree 100%. I'd love to see a great plan for it. I just think it's time, and there's so many more things we do. Shirley just mentioned, you know, about the Sun Belt Conference. There just seems to be a world of opportunity, and we've been just dragging our feet on it, and not us here, but the community as a whole. So, okay, that's all.
I just want to say, David, I agree with you. I don't feel comfortable earmarking this 1.3 on this budget, and if we're voting on that, then I would vote not to approve the budget. I
So,
just don't feel comfortable having the 1.3 there without a plan for the 1.3.
so it's really just setting it in reserves. It is not sending it to the Bay Center for whatever. Just to be clear. And so, yeah, I mean, you vote how you need to vote, but it's similar to what we had done last year, where the debt service money that we had been paying, we were setting aside for a future asset or future improvements.
Right, and if I'm not mistaken, wasn't the year before, or maybe it's been a couple years, when Steve was still with Visit Pensacola, I think the supplemental we gave back to Visit Pensacola to help them do additional marketing or something like that. I remember something with the supplemental going back into for Visit Pensacola to help do additional marketing,
For the Bay Center or just in general?
just in general.
Yeah, and that was, so that was where I think that it was tough for Darren, because the supplemental had always been built into the budget. And we actually did that this year by fronting the 1.5 from the reserves fund balance. That's essentially what we're doing, is we're taking a supplemental and going ahead and saying, yes, include this in our budget, that we want to spend this money for Visit or whoever. And so, yeah, so once the returns for the year would come in, we'd see how much was left, and that we would then give the whole thing to Visit. I think part of what we want to probably discuss in this second item is instead of just having it pass through, is that we set up some reserves and things like that.
Then we need to say that in this line item.
In the 1.3 line item?
Yes, sir.
All right, so then, are you ready for a motion then?
well, we can continue to have a conversation after this motion.
Sure.
Right?
Okay. Then I would make a motion to accept and pass on to the Board of County Commissioners the budget as presented with the following changes: that the 1st through 3 cent BCC Bay Center operations for 1.3 be listed as asset reserves, and that also the $200,000 for the Naval Aviation Museum be broken down to $100,000 as previously provided, plus $100,000 to be dedicated towards marketing.
Again, I think it just goes back.
Hold on a
Sorry,
second.
Chairman.
So we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second for discussion.
We have a motion and a second.
Okay.
Discussion?
Yeah.
Ronnie?
Yeah, I think that's kind of where we were to begin. Again, I go back, I'm sorry, but last year, we said we were going to set aside some money. Once we start collecting it, set it aside, and we were going to look at and entertain proposals. I don't know, that's kind of where we are today, is just setting this money aside so we can hear these proposals. And then once those proposals become available to us, I guess we pick one that we say, hey, we want to recommend further to the Board of County Commissioners and say, hey, this is the one that we think out of what we, and this may not come this year. Just because we have one, at 1.3 this year, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be 2.6 next year or 3.9.
That's the idea.
Yeah, or the year after. I mean, it's not
Right.
like this is going to.
It's
But
not
the other
saying
side, the other side of the argument, of course, is that once this goes into a reserve here, and we put it here, and we say this, that the people on the dais after us, the Board of County Commissioners themselves, come back and say, well, we see that money's just sitting there, and there's a project we've just got to take care of. That's always the case here, is that once money becomes freed up, then commissioners often say, hey, man, I need this in my district. I just got to have it. And so I think that's kind of the concern, but for me and for my vote, I like putting money in a bank. I do. I like to put money in a bank and keep it there until we figure out what to do with it, because otherwise, what do we spend it on? Maybe the better question. If we don't do that, what do we do?
And
Chairman?
Ronnie, I would agree with your concerns, because we did that last year.
Sure.
With the intent of paying it back with our overage, which we just never got.
I know.
But I'd say in all those instances, it did come back in front of this board.
I agree. Yes, sir.
So, well, so I think, well, I don't even know what to say. I think that the 1.3, rather than being allocated, because it's really a fund forward, right? I forget what the accounting term is that Amber's used in the past, carry forward, because it's not part of the revenue, it's part of the current year's revenue that we're going to carry forward to next year for a project that we don't know what it looks like, what it is. I'd rather not have it be part of the budget. It can go, because it's not part of the revenue that needs to be spent. It's coming in this year, it's going to go into Fund 108. Then we're going to have this other discussion about, reserves and what that may or may not look like. Because, in the past, the projects that you're talking about, Ronnie, that all the commissioners would like, there's, important things that come up. And,
Sure.
and the different districts or the overall county, they need to be funded. But, we've put in $845,000 for projects that really has no commitment. I mean, it has no, it's not allocated or encumbered by anything. So we've never had that before, that level of, obviously the 1.3 for projects, whatever that meant a couple of years ago. We just never had that as far as I've been involved. We've never had that. So there are those funds available for projects as they may come up this year. If it's really important to the county, there's always the reserve fund. If it's an emergency fund, then it's totally a different item, discussion. But I'd like to see that 1.3 just come out of this and go back. The other 200,000, whether we do the Chappie James 100,000 or not, but we've all agreed about, or at least to this point, we've in the discussion agreed to keep the additional 100,000 for the museum. That 1.3, possibly 1.4, if we don't agree with the Chappie James, goes back to, just stays in the fund until there's a plan that shows the best use for spending it. Because right now, putting it out there is saying, we're going to spend it, but we don't have a plan yet, and so let's just make sure the check's available. The check's available, the money would be in the fund.
I think it's, as our discussion last week with the board went into bonding a future project or something like that, I see it more as thinking that that's probably going to be a future out year spend, and that we go ahead and budget for it. And then that way we're not having to scramble to cut 1.3 from our budget in the future. It was overlooked in the initial budget.
Well, I don't think it's going to be cut from a future budget. the 1.3 is going to be in the fund. It's an accumulation from this year's overage collection that won't be spent. It's not, so we can move it out of that reserve in future years whenever we need to spend it based on a plan versus just spending it without a plan, because, and forgive my expression, but just to put lipstick on a pig. I mean, I think the Bay Center needs some upgrades, but we don't know what that need looks like right now. Maybe Michael's working on a great plan, but we haven't seen it as a board. And so today I'm not prepared to allocate it to even if it's the Bay Center or it's something else. It's something we want to use for future projects, major capital investment, whether it's bonding those revenues for, or using what we grow, reserves we're growing versus bonding future revenue.
So, I mean, I don't know why we couldn't put some stipulation around it that, I mean, again, as evident by the beach access, when we try to spend TDC money, I think that it should come in front of the board. And that it's a, as Ronnie said, it's something that builds with a designated purpose. I think when you just don't allocate it or just let it accrue, then it somewhat meshes together. I mean, just like we took the 500,000 in reserves, I'd say it's, I'm hesitant to do that because I would rather that be a true reserves account to where if we need to pull 500 for marketing dollars or something like that, we can pull that, and that we also haven't gone against the board's desire to set aside money specifically for a certain project.
Just to follow up a little bit, and I speak frankly, I mean, we talk about things, not about this, but you guys know me. I will tell you that if we earmark it for a capital improvement and the board goes after it and it's already on that line item, it's going to read in the front page of the paper, Board of County Commissioners Stills new community center. I mean, that's what it's going to say, and I'll make sure of that, but that's just how it works, So at least if you have it earmarked for something, I mean, that seems to be the only teeth. And that's still not a lot, is my concern.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
I think that your next item number 2, about establishing a marketing reserve policy, if there was also a policy to establish a reserve for the Bay Center or Convention Center, that might achieve our goal here. I'm hearing that everybody wants to set aside some money to help to invest into the Bay Center, and we don't have to appropriate it if we have a policy that says we want to set this much aside each year. So we can achieve that, but the appropriation is what we would do in lieu of having a policy, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I could go with that because, again, I don't expect all 1.3 of this to be spent this upcoming fiscal year, which I think is more about what this budget is, if I'm tracking what you were saying, and that it would accomplish everything that we're trying to do, and that we've set aside money via policy for a replacement, upgrade, new facility, but it also doesn't intermingle with just regular reserves. And that when Michael presents us with the projects that he would like to complete, it can come to us, it can also come to my board, and we can say, we find these worthy projects, we think we have the money in this reserve fund that we've already set aside to pay for X. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, well, I was thinking similar to what Amber just addressed was when, and obviously this is the other agenda item, but really it's not about just a marketing reserve fund, but reserve funds. I mean, what are we reserving, funds for? If we don't need to spend it all in marketing in this one year because we have future need, we can build based on, accumulated cash plus future revenues to do emergency fund, build it to a certain level, take, other funds and build a reserve for capital improvements to the Bay Center based on a return, and another fund on other capital projects like, multi-use facility. I mean, it doesn't have to be a one-fund reserve. It can be, we have Fund 108, and in it has multiple restricted funds. I mean, it's just it's an accounting, creating new journal, new funds.
It's exactly
So-
accounting. GASB 54 is what guides it.
Yeah.
And depending upon the parameters you place on those policies dictates how it gets accounted for, whether it's restricted, committed, assigned, or whatever. But a good policy, though, should also define what our goals are, how we access those dollars, as well as what the purpose of those dollars are for. And then if we do access those dollars in a year such as last year, in the event of a pandemic, that policy ideally should also discuss replenishment of the funds. Not only how we'll replenish it, but in what time frame we'd like to replenish it.
What, do you have a breakdown that you're thinking currently at all, as far as percentage-wise of?
No,
Okay.
not at this point.
Yeah.
But I bring that, we're having that part of this conversation, I think, because we got to figure out, do we want to show that 1.3 million on this budget for next year, or have it in the reserves, and then we come together for a policy that will include that 1.3 million for a future project, once we get a plan on how to spend it. Because right now, we're just kind of putting it out there, and something will come before us, I'm sure, to spend with the report and all the other, requirements of the statute. But why even allocate it if we don't have a plan in the current year budget?
So if you want to, would it be better to take item 2 before we take this item then? That way we can establish a reserve fund and then, not to just totally shift gears, but, without having it in place, it would be tough to make a motion to say that's where you're going to put it.
So, to answer that question, what I was hoping today, what we would do, because I don't think anybody's come with any kind of plan and, proposed ordinance for reserve funds, et cetera, would be to create a committee to do the work, to come back to this board and make the recommendation for how to set up these funds based on, some research on what other communities are doing in our area, our size, and say, hey, they take, 2% of their revenues and put it into, emergency funds until they get to, 1/3. I'm just using numbers as an example, to 1/3 of their total collections, per year. And then they also take another 3% and they put that into, capital improvements of their county-owned facilities, whatever it looks like, that we're talking about. I was hoping to create a committee to come back to us at either our next meeting or, the following meeting. So, because I don't know that anybody's prepared to vote on making a recommendation on a policy to the BOCC. I may be wrong. If somebody has that, speak up.
I don't think that policy would have to go in front of the BCC next week. In this budget, we have a 1.5 reserves fund balance carry forward, and we're talking about 1.3. If we want to, I think it goes a long way to show that we're committed and recognize the intent of the BCC to set aside these funds, leaving it in here. But I also think that I also understand the fact that we don't want to necessarily expend them in fiscal year 22, that if we created a policy that some of these funds went towards. So I see it both sides.
Any other discussion? Tish?
I think what Robert said, maybe if we discuss agenda number 2 and then come back to this 1.3, depending on what we decide and discuss on the marketing reserve fund. But I agree with you, without a plan or without a committee or anybody doing any research, and then just, this board says, let's put a marketing reserve fund together, and then, there's no real, meat behind the bones, and then we're just, it may be a waste of time to say that, and then it just goes back into Fund 108 or something. So I would like to, if we designate it for a marketing reserve fund, that it's got stipulations and it's got everything that, would make sense to use those dollars properly, that whether it's, 1 year, 2 years, or however, or if it's just going to sit there for a while, or if there's a percentage of us that's going to sit there for a while, and then gives Visit Pensacola, a portion of that each year to kind of ramp up their marketing each year. Even if, like, this year I think is going to be a lot busier year versus what we may see next year, just because people are not traveling in 2020. They're using those funds in 2021, and they may not in 2022. So, I wouldn't want to put those funds off to the side to just say they're there forever until the next Black Swan event happens and we have another pandemic 100 years from now. So I think, we got to do a little more research and have a solid plan before we just say it's a marketing reserve fund and put it off to the side.
I don't disagree. The only thing that I would like, and I'm going back to what Robert is, the 1.3, I think any of us that have been to the Civic Center recognizes that there are a number of items that they want to do. I mean, there's broken chairs, there's this and that. I'd like to see the 1.3 set aside so it will go to the Civic Center or the Bay Center and not be used for road maintenance or this or that. And I think if it's there specifically for that, then the county, we know there are times that, we're the pot of gold. And then that way it would be set aside that somebody else can't be used for something else. So how
if
do we achieve that?
So if I'm understanding you correctly, so we keep the 1.3 on you're saying you'd like to see us keep the 1.3 million in the budget for next year, allocated or assigned to asset reserves, like Robert had described, so that it's not in Fund 108. It's sitting there until it's spent, but it has a restriction on it for asset reserves until a proposal comes to us, which is probably what Robert's been saying the whole time.
That's what I think, that if we don't specify that it be used for the base center, then it might get used for something else that we don't even know. And I'd rather at least we have some control of that.
Rather than another beach access or a bridge repair, or whatever else. Okay.
So what is the language going to look like in this motion? Is this?
So this is still,
motion.
yeah, this
It's
is
still
the
the
motion.
motion for this,
Yeah,
okay.
in your second.
So,
Still approval of the budget.
Okay,
Item
we're still-
1, or
okay,
that
make
first,
sure we're still
whatever
there.
item that is. Item 3 on the agenda.
so who's going to call the vote?
So, well, if there's a motion,
Yeah.
Robert made the motion,
I second.
Ronnie seconded, we've had discussion. Any further discussion?
Can I hear the motion again? Or what
The
is it?
motion was to adopt the budget as presented to send to the BCC as our recommended budget with the changes of the 1 through 3 cent BCC based on operations being an asset reserve line item of 1.3 million, and also the Naval Aviation Museum's $200,000 request being broken down into 100,000 as their previous requests have been, and then 100,000 for marketing.
That was the motion that was
Yep.
made and seconded, which would include the $100,000 going to the Chappie James Memorial, because that is in here. The $20,000 increase going to the African American Heritage Society as they requested.
Just to comment on that, I think it would still be up to our board to decide if they want to do the 30 or the 50.
Right.
It just recognizes their $50,000 request in that
but it's coming as a recommendation from the
It is.
TDC. So if somebody doesn't recommend it, say it now, but otherwise, it's coming as a recommendation, all of those.
I think with everything, I would say with everything that's on here, I told Darren that I would expect a line item budget, which we really haven't seen for Visit or for any of the unified budgets,
I agree.
to be presented to our board,
To TDC or to
to
BOCC?
the BOCC for our discussion next week. And so the 7.85 may change when it gets to our board based on what's in that. So we didn't dive into all that, but it was more of they had a request for a certain percentage, and following that and the guidelines of how we took the 5th cent vote. So again, I expect to see a line item budget presented to us next week.
Okay.
But yes, as with everything in this thing, it can change next week. Of course, it won't be adopted next week, but we'll have another chance to discuss it based on that conversation.
All right. Any other discussion? Not? We'll call for the vote. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'll oppose.
Opposed? Did you capture that? All right. Thank you. Motion passes. All right. So, discussion item number 4 is to discuss and approve for recommendation to the BCC a policy to create a restricted marketing reserves fund of available tourist development tax to set aside for special marketing needs. So I guess I've already kind of told y'all what I'd like to see. I think we needed to bring this to the meeting agenda and discuss, but I don't know that we're prepared today to set policy or recommend a policy. Unless somebody feels otherwise, I'd rather create a committee.
Sure. I mean, I think maybe if Amber had some ideas, much like she did with the Bay Center, I'd like to hear them. So at least we have a general idea and can talk about it. I would say, for years, we put reserves in the budget, but there was never an actual transaction where, is that right, Amber? That even though we may have put 500,000 in reserves, it was never actually
So
recognized as being in a reserve or something like that, and
not
it was
it's not a
restricted.
true reserve.
Right.
Because what we've done is we've appropriated in our profit and loss statement, our budget, a reserve amount, but we've never placed money aside on the balance sheet so that it can just accumulate.
So it's still in 108, it's just not restricted in
It
any way.
depends. If we've spent it, it's not there anymore. If we have not spent it, it rolled to fund balance, but it's no longer earmarked because there's not a policy that earmarks it for a purpose, right?
And that could be something like a supplemental budget to Visit, when you say that we spent it. It's not that we've just come in and.
Correct. That's absolutely right. It doesn't
Right.
mean BCC spent it.
Right,
But-
it's still
means-
used for tourism-related.
Right.
Absolutely, yes.
But if we've put it, so I think what she's saying is that we've put in a $500,000 reserve, say, over the last 5 budgets, we would expect $2.5 million in there. There's not $2.5 million in there because we have put it towards the supplemental budget or things like that. And so essentially, we probably just keep using the same $500,000 every year. I mean, it's almost just like it's just there, but no one ever does anything with it.
A fund balance policy would actually cause it to accumulate for a purpose.
Yes. And so, I think that, I know that Visit's supportive of this. I know DC's here. And I would be, I see it both ways. I think if Visit wants to establish something that could stay in 108 out of their budget, I would be supportive of that. I think, again, there's other, and maybe that's part of, we can help establish it through the supplemental, what's ever extra each year. I don't think the policy that we had, where we just spend everything extra that we collected was a good policy. And had we been setting some of that aside, it would have been better. So,
Yeah, DC?
Thanks. Yeah, Darren's out of town, so just, I want to mention too, that obviously the genesis of this was the precedent of other DMOs surrounding the area that had these in place. And I think it was emailed to you right before this meeting, but there is language precedent as well, you know, and maybe it meets some of the things that Amber talks about, maybe it doesn't, but because there are ones around us that have language specifically for this exact kind of thing, we obviously have some access to that. Perhaps that has gotten through, be it county commissions or whatever governing body. So, so we have that available if that's something that we need to look at.
and I know that we just did a budget amendment last week for them. You know, DC, I think it's fair to say you all don't feel that you're going to be able to spend the money that's collected as part of the 5th cent. Again, showing the commitment that stays with marketing, I would feel comfortable using that to start as a fund or something like that. But
yeah, sorry. So exactly. I mean, it's an opportunity that we have now. Again, we have other surrounding areas that were, you know, had something like this in place for last year, and we didn't. So again, this is not something unprecedented. It's really, if anything, we could compare around our region that this is something that we're lacking to help make sure that these efforts continue. And these are conversations we all had in some fashion of, you know, how do we continue to do this? And other parts of our community had reserve funds to be able to maintain that. And so that's exactly right. Instead of feeling force-fed into, hey, we've got these dollars, let's, you know, try to spend them. Let's really catch up to maybe where we need to be able to withstand something like this.
That makes sense.
Tish? Pressure button?
I know DC said that there's some language that we can use, but at some point in time, it has to be discussed how to appropriate these funds and then the use of them and then how much accumulation of the funds. And you see what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to just keep putting money into this reserve fund and then it never gets used. Or, you know, I would like to see Visit Pensacola maybe next year if TDT collections are not as high as they were in 2021, that they're able to get some of those funds, you know, to keep up with marketing our area and keep, you know, heads and beds, keep the area busy. Just because it's busy this year, not to just think or hope that it's going to be the same next year with the same or a lower amount. And I know when I see this Visit Pensacola 2019 actuals and 2022, I know it's a higher amount by 1.3, but I mean, those of us that have businesses, how many things cost the same that they cost in 2019 versus now? So in my mind, 7.8 is probably less than 6.5 that was spent in 2019. I know it's a higher number, but it's gonna get you less than what it got us in 2019 in my mind. So I just want to make sure that I know Visit Pensacola's in some restriction when it comes to funds, and they have a certain amount of time to use it, and if they don't use it, they have to turn it back in or something like that. I don't understand all the details on it, but I do know I've discussed a little bit with them. And
So you're correct. They actually don't have the money in their, well, they have an advance in their bank account that they spend down. But by the time we get to the end of the year, if they don't spend the $1 million that we just appropriated last week, it just doesn't go to them. It stays still inside of Fund 108. And to place it aside in a reserve, again, a policy would allow us to place it into a reserve. Otherwise, we would need to appropriate it into the budget again, as Commissioner Bender keeps referring to, in lieu of a policy.
yeah.
And a policy can address both what Darren and I've looked at what he found as well. That addresses for sure the Visit Pensacola's focus, but it may not address, I don't remember, DC, if it addresses the Bay Center, for example, or what you're referring to, which might be more of a stabilization arrangement where in a year in which the revenues drop, we have a way in which to stabilize our operations so that we're not having to cut until the market comes back around.
Right.
So,
I suspect that's for all outside agencies, though, all those smaller, so, like, I don't know, let me see. Like fireworks now going, St. Michael's Cemetery, same thing though, right?
are you asking if the reserve would, or the policy would apply, or?
No, what I'm asking is if they don't spend down, will that, do they
Oh,
keep it? Or
that's
just-
correct.
it's-
That's
yeah,
correct. So
okay.
all community
agencies,
partners, no
yeah.
matter the funding source with the county, are on a reimbursement basis with the exception of just a couple. Visit Pensacola is one of the ones that does receive an advance, but they still have to submit receipts, and if they don't spend that advance, they have to return it.
Okay.
So receipts always have to be produced for every community partner of the county.
Good.
So,
Policy.
if I may,
Yeah.
is there a policy? You know, I think we want to hear, like, what would be a recommended amount? You know, is there a percentage of the budget?
It varies.
What's best practices?
So best practice for a reserve that would be similar to a stabilization arrangement, I say that typically 2 months. 2 months of operational expenses would need to be set aside in a reserve. That's not going to achieve, though, the Bay Center goal. So, because the Bay Center goal I'm hearing is to accumulate funds to either invest back in. Our ice floor is 20 years old. We're trying to get as much as we can out of it, and we might eventually want to construct or
So for me,
rehabilitate the
again, I
building.
think that's why you have it as a line item, that it goes towards the Bay Center, you know, asset reserve, so that it's not intertwined with the other reserves, because I think what we would probably want to at least establish in this reserve account, based on, you said 2 months, would be at least about a $1.3 million, that's 1/12 of 7.8. Again, is that adequate? Do we want to add a little bit more? And then, right, once we hit that number, then we know we have that reserve, and we can adjust our budget as needed. But at least in a year like last year, it could help offset the heavy cuts that we had to make.
Does it have to have an amount to, 1.3 amount or a certain amount? Can it just,
Be by percentage?
yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
typically
just-
it's a percentage.
okay. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
a percentage, but
'Cause-
I think that would also, by putting in a percentage or something, it would address the concern that we just build this pile mountain of gold that never gets used, which it is the intent to build a pile mountain of gold, but we do want it to be reinvested and into the community and into efforts to draw people here.
Right.
But also have it there in case of emergency break glass.
Right. Well, and so I want to make sure we're also, because you mentioned 7.8 million, that's the Visit Pensacola piece, but are you talking about unified budget or Visit Pensacola only? Because all three agencies do they do all the different work, the different types, and so I would think that because we've created this unified budget, this group, that's what we'd be talking about. Because they're all doing different marketings and they all attract different, and it depends on what the issue is. If it becomes another oil spill, as an example, are we going to try to attract beach tourists, or are we going to be trying to attract sports and cultural tourists? So it should be a marketing fund, and it could be the Naval Aviation Museum. It could be any of these other agencies, but
That's a
or
good
anybody
idea
in
to
the county.
diversify, yeah, I
It's
agree.
marketing, not necessarily restricted for Visit Pensacola, but
Right.
for overall marketing. Visit Pensacola obviously is the DMO.
And I think it would be up to the board to establish what the fund is. I think, it sounds to me like, personally, I think we should probably try to establish a unified budget reserve and then a BCC reserve.
For marketing or for,
Well, I think you just have your general reserve, then you have your asset reserve, and then you have your unified budget reserve, is how I would, in a perfect world, see it. And then that way, it's not all in one bucket. We have our specific asset reserve for future capital improvements and structures. And then you also have something just on the marketing side that, again, would, is focused on that.
It's 33%, it's not, yeah, all three.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
the amounts vary. I mean,
Sure.
I expect bucket one to be much bigger than the other two.
Okay.
Eventually, maybe bucket two overtakes bucket one because you're putting in money each year, but there'd be some, that'd be the structure I would see.
Okay.
Sorry, let me add a couple things on that. Also, remember, again, the proposal of this from Visit is also based on this being the 5th cent money, which, correct me if I'm wrong, obviously was tied to marketing for this year. So, you know, where that ends up, the idea is instead of rushing into marketing something because this money has showed up, this is the opportune time to make sure that it is, you know, earmarked for marketing in whatever way that's decided. And then second, it came up earlier about, you said it as a percentage. I believe the Bay County example, and would probably make sense here, is if this reserve is set up for Visit, it would be up to, you know, you'd put a percentage like 50% of an annual operation. Now, that doesn't mean that all goes in this year, but that's a lot, very similar to how even Visit's own reserve policy is written, because you want to strike that balance, right, of, like you said, the pile of money. You want to make sure you're prepared, but you also want to make sure those dollars are being activated, and I guess in some ways you're not being overly conservative and not going out there and marketing. So
Right.
I think that was, again, the example that you have is the Bay County example says, I believe, is up to, you know, that the fund could be funded up to 50% of annual operation. So that it works out for percent.
I just want to make sure that we don't have, or not creating a stockpile. And if there's an emergency fund of some sort, then maybe, you know, Visit Pensacola gets a business interruption insurance or something like we do for, you know, for businesses, you know, and maybe they pay for that insurance so that if there is another pandemic or something that caused them to not get the funds or get the revenue that they normally get, they would be able to tap that insurance, but not to stockpile this money and to use marketing for marketing to keep the momentum going that we've seen in Pensacola. Especially this year. There's a lot of markets out there that are just not seeing what we have seen this year, and so I think it's the best time to keep that momentum going. It's in my mind, it's not the best to just stockpile it. You know, for years we've always thought in Pensacola that we can't keep up with Destin and Orange Beach, and I think for the first time in my history of being in the hotel business, we're there or higher than they are. But when it comes to RevPAR and ADR, we're you know. So we've shown that the demand is there and that we can keep up with it. So I think as long as marketing's done properly, we can keep that momentum going. So I think you know, if we do a reserve, it's got to be marketing reserve, but I don't want it to be where it's unlimited, where we just keep piling it in there and we're not really using it, and we're just hoping for the next, or waiting for the next Black Swan event, and then, you know, that's when that comes out.
I would just say, you know, if Visit or a unified partner feels that, again, I want them to spend money wisely and appropriately. And if they have some allocation that is given to them for a year and they feel that it can either be spent more wisely the following year, or they would like to put it towards a reserve, I support that. And that, and then I would probably give them a little bit of leeway in when they need to use it. I think we want to try to establish a policy that we would want to maintain or get up to a certain level. But again, I think, I mean, just like with an HSA, use it or lose it, I don't think it's necessarily the best policy. Especially in this case, but then it also honors our commitment to put those dollars towards marketing. And so that's why I'm supportive of establishing this type of reserve.
Yeah, well, and I agree with establishing a reserve. I think it's important. At what level? You know, I don't think we need a bunch of money accumulated that it's not going to work for us. But we have to have something that, when disaster happens, for whatever reason, we have a loss of revenues, that we have a fund available. What that amount is, you know, I don't know, whether it's a half, like like DC mentioned, others may be doing, you know, half of annual collection, I don't know. I think we need to figure out what we want to do as far as the capital, the asset reserve looks like, what funds it, you know, where these funds come from for this marketing fund. What is the source of funding for that? Is it the 5th cent? Is it only what's, you know, collected above what was appropriated, you know, that overage? You know, where is that coming from? What's the priority to refund it if it's used? You know, is it number one, you know, the following year in the appropriation, as it gets funded before anything else? You know, I think those are a lot of questions that need to be answered, really, before we kind of establish.
And I think the important thing is making sure that the appropriate uses are applied to the appropriate pennies. And that's why I think if, for instance, if a 5th cent allocation went towards a marketing reserve, I think we would all feel comfortable that that would be an approved future use of that money. We would not want to spend that, to put the 5th cent money in a reserve account and then try to use it on some type of project or other use that's not permitted under the 5th cent and get slapped. So I think that's part of probably what the policy would say. But I think it's just important to remember that we actually look at, that we don't over allocate from one penny or certain use, and make sure that it's covered under the appropriate forms.
So how do we do this? We don't have staff to direct, to do homework, if you will. Do we create a committee of the whole to come back with, you know, recommendations of our own homework? Or logistically, I'm not exactly sure how we do this.
So there must be policies across the state, I would think, right, Amber? There's got to be policies across the state like this.
So there are policies for DMOs, as was shared.
Yeah.
There are policies for counties, cities, because there's guidance. As I mentioned, GASB 54.
Yeah.
So Governmental Accounting Standards Board issued statement number 54 for governments to establish fund balance policies based upon. And that is what we would use to account for that. That's why I keep referring to it, because it might be a good thing to look at as well, for parameters to build into that policy. It is ideal, I think, to take into consideration what Darren has taken a look at so far and Visit Pensacola, and use that as one element of a potential reserve. But I think we do still need to discuss, as Commissioner Bender keeps mentioning, the Bay Center as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, so you're saying there's an accounting policy or guideline through GAP or whomever that says these, if you set up this fund, a reserve fund, these are the guidelines you must follow. I think what Ronnie is saying is there's probably communities within the state, like
city
Bay
has one.
City, or city
I wrote the
councils,
cities.
sorry. Okay, so the cities on specific funds, but there's probably counties out there who have it specific to tourist development. With,
Exactly.
like Bay County.
And I believe that's
there's gotta
what-
be many more.
I believe that's what DC was mentioning that we already have. Visit already has.
So we have Bay County, is that the one we have? So we can have Bay County?
It says Panama City Beach, I'm assuming.
Okay. Yeah, so, yeah, they have a special,
Right,
they're not countywide tourist development tax. I don't even know if they have tourist development tax in Bay County, in Panama City Beach. I think they do, okay. So Anyway, but there's got to be other counties, Walton County,
Right.
Okaloosa County, they all are much larger collectors than we are. I mean, Walton County is at like $40 to $50 million a year in TDT collection. Certainly, they've built reserves, certainly they've got, these types of policies, and so, for different types of reserves, whether it's, and I think, in this budget that we're recommending, we have $500,000 for beach renourishment. I think some counties also have set up funding sources for that beach renourishment through the TDT with policies, et cetera. And so those are things that we should be looking for in the future so that, that if we set that policy, then this beach renourishment line item is sort of a fixed line item in every year's budget. It's not coming out. Or it's a build reserve, whatever it is. But, so do we direct staff to call around the state and come back with?
Yes.
Yes. So who is staff? Amber's looking around the room. Yeah. Tina.
I have lots of time on my hands and
I
nothing
know,
to do.
right now
No, I'm
with budget, right.
I mean, I think it's very important to
Yes.
incorporate,
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
No, I agree.
and certainly take a look at, what all parties involved would like to see.
Right.
Maybe Tina could send it to us.
I'm hearing we don't want to continue to build a stockpile either. We want to make sure we're taking care of our own
Right.
while
Yeah, we
building a
want to,
stockpile.
I mean, we're raising the funds to reinvest in the community, to
Right.
continue to develop the tourism.
So I don't know if staff alone is a great, I'd be happy to help.
Right.
But I don't know that
Yes.
I want it to be just my opinion.
Yeah, well, and
Yeah.
I don't think we're asking for an opinion. I
Okay.
think what we're asking for is research. Somebody
Okay.
provide us
backup.
the county, Walton County's plan on
Okay.
on
Yeah,
reserves.
send us some
And
backup.
that's very easy to do,
Yes.
yes.
I was going to say, easy for me to say, well, everybody's out of town. We can probably volunteer somebody at Visit Pensacola to
Right.
help with
I
that.
think that's
But Darren will
yeah.
be,
I like
Right. What do they say?
Darren will do it
We
all.
as in them. But,
and Ace
yeah,
didn't show up, so they can do it too.
that's right. But as the commissioner was saying, just to address that, because I understand philosophically about, how big is the reserve going to be, but remember what we're talking about here at the end of the day is this is a 5th cent for this year. The short term is we've got money that we want to use smartly, which we believe a smart way to use it is to be like other neighboring DMOs and have a reserve in cases like this that we don't have now, as opposed to rushing into, having to, use it or lose it kind of situation. And then that's probably something we can address down the, what percentage of that, in the long term, as money could be allocated into a reserve. That's, I'm sure, certainly a discussion we could have long term past this.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, thank you for pointing out that it would actually be 4 buckets. One for renourishment.
Yeah, I mean, and then it doesn't, we've already.
Pretty
put
soon
the
we're gonna be
line
able to play the
item on
bozo game, but, all of our buckets, but I think that's good to separate them out and show that we have a commitment to the future.
Okay.
So I think that's sort of are the marching orders, no real action on that item today.
But what, is there going to be a group with Visit? Are they going to do the research or come back to us?
Were they going to send it? Were they going to send it to us, and we were committee of a whole to do it?
Hey, DC's dad didn't show up today. We can assign some stuff. Tim Reeves is in charge. No, I think, I think it needs to just come back to us, information come back to us with the research, find out what counties have these different reserves in Florida that meet, the accounting requirements, and
Yeah.
And then we can sort of maybe even schedule not today, but after our August meeting, find out what comes back and look at it, and possibly schedule a workshop to address it, to then come back to the next meeting to approve it. I mean, as far as timeline is concerned.
So we're thinking maybe, so I can reach out to and get some examples within counties, but it may be good to take a look at some DMOs as well. So we're thinking maybe a team effort.
Nice.
Visit
That'd be
takes the
great.
DMO research, we'll take the county piece. Does that help?
Yeah,
And
that's
then is
perfect.
there a
Great.
date by which you would like to reconvene, and who are we reconvening with? Are we just transmitting to you?
No, because I can't share it, so,
That's true.
um,
Which-
Bring it back to our next meeting?
yes, bring it Tina, but if we could have it for our next meeting is August, what date is it? 10th, August the 10th.
And then we'll set a
approximately a
workshop after that.
Yeah, we can, if we have it, and we can kind of discuss it as an item and then schedule a workshop after that.
Perfect.
Between our next two meetings.
Excellent. Okay,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion for that item? Not? That is the end of our agenda. Meeting adjourned.
Turn.
Thank you.